universe doesn't seem to function like that. Everything seems to be impacting the behavior pattern, the performance, the qualitative aspects of every other thing. The buildings should be in cardinal direction. And I started figuring out the orientation of all the ancient cities. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, you have ancient Beijing, you have Roman towns, you have temple towns of South India, and many more. We all are searchers. So what are we searching? We are searching something that we already know. If this book can create curiosity in you towards the realm of subtle energies, perhaps that would be the success of this book. Yeah, it's been a very interesting life. I'm blessed to have been born to some amazing parents. I grew up in an environment which was spiritually inclined, and eventually I had a good fortune to be directed towards a very interesting field, a passion I had since childhood to study architecture, and I got entry to one of the best colleges of architecture, School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi. And that's how my journey in the field of architecture started. In 1991, I graduated in 1996. And since then, it's been an eventful and amazing journey with many diverse experiences. Simply said, geopathic stress is some kind of, imagine it as some kind of radiations which are coming from under the earth. Radiation itself may not be the accurate word, but within this precept, we have that there is some abrasion of the magnetic field, the natural magnetic field at that locations, which can be caused due to various reasons. One of the reasons is underground water. Another reason could be underground service lines. And some of the scientists have also postulated that over past 40 years or 50 years, so many underground nuclear tests have been carried out which send out shock waves across the earth that many kilometers under the earth, fault lines are developed, which gives passage to many radiations to come to the surface which were not there earlier. Net, there are some kind of radiations which are coming from the earth. Some of them are even radioactive in nature. So radon gas is something that we are aware of. It's an isotope, a radioactive isotope. It's a gas, it's an odorless gas. Often it has been found to be accumulated in basement areas. Well, it's not healthy for us, but it's not very difficult to get rid of it. A good ventilation can take care of it. There is aberration, as I mentioned, in the magnetism of the earth itself at certain points. And interestingly, all these aspects were studied in last century in depth, and they were given lines, the names of these lines were given after their discoverers, Hartmann line, Lee lines. All this was known, but what surprised me was that despite the fact that there is irrefutable evidence that geopathic stress reduces the immunity per se. And let's look at it from energetic standpoint. Immunity per se doesn't get compromised, but you can say the energetic field around any living being is impacted by these abnormal radiations. Thereby you can imagine that the focus of the body is to try to get to the normal state, and that takes away its focus from its activity of cleansing the body. Usually at night time, and especially the sleeping spots are the ones which we focus on when we are studying geopathic stress nodes, and we try to focus and tell people to avoid geopathic stress nodes, especially at sleeping points. Why is that so? Because at night time during sleep, our body goes into a regenerative mode. That all our energy goes into cleansing the body. And during that time, if the body is lying over a zone which is not in its natural state, that means there is some kind of radiation, some kind of impact which is not natural, the body's energetic system tries to first maintain balance with that. It gets disturbed, whether it's electromagnetic, whether it's cell phone or Wi-Fi which is kept very nearby, whether it's underground radiation, all these impact in the same way on the energetic envelope of the body. And when at night time that energetic balance or the immunity or the cleansing aspect of the body is not done properly, then over a period of time, the whatever are the impurities within the body, they accumulate and eventually result in disease. And this is not something that I am telling. I am not a medical person. This is a direct inference of many research papers which found that many cancer patients were found to be located or sleeping on geopathic nodes, and this is way back in 70s. My curiosity comes to from the fact that if such irrefutable evidence was aware, how come geopathic stress and related sciences do not figure either in our medical curriculum or architectural curriculum? And that is something that we all can look into with an open mind perhaps. I kind of had a professional life in reverse. Usually people take up a job, do a job for few years, few months, and then eventually they move on, probably set up their own practice. And that's how it moves for many people. With me, right after college, after a small stint in a job, I thought of changing my job, and during that change, I took a break for a few weeks, and somehow somebody approached me to do a project for them. And I thought, okay, let me finish this project and then I'll go back to job. And that was the day, and that was the first project. I think a small facade refurbishment I had to do for somebody's house in Gurgaon. And then this story started, and for 12 long years, I went on to run a small consultancy of my own, doing small projects, interior projects, in fact, whatever came my way. And that was how practice was always in that time, that you don't choose, you just go ahead and grab up whatever comes your way. And that was the fun of it. And subsequently, along that journey, I was very much interested in the field of Vedic Vastu, and I got to know that in Bangalore, in Art of Living Foundation, they were organizing a very in-depth course on Vastu, and this was in 2008. So I thought this is a good opportunity to go learn this subject in its depth. And I went there and I studied and that subject, and eventually graduated from that university with the Vastu Visharad degree. However, on my way back that evening, I met a friend of mine who was part of an international consultancy firm called RSP Design. And I just went casually to meet him. And he, in casual talk, he invited me to meet the MD of that company. And to cut the long story short, that 15-minute of casual meeting with their MD of RSP India, he asked me to come on board and help them set up their presence in Gurgaon. And that was suddenly a bolt from the blue for me. Eventually, I was also teaching during that time at SPA. I was running my own projects, but it was a tough call for me to change gears, but definitely a very exciting one. And it took me few months, and somewhere in 2008, I saw myself becoming a part of one of the largest MNCs in India, Singapore-based RSP India Limited. And that started another 7 years of amazing journey into a field that into a diverse field where I was exposed to millions of square feet of housing, IT projects, working with international architects. RSP was executive architects for various projects in which international architects like Perkins Eastman were involved in design of Indian School of Business, and I was very fortunate to become the lead architect from RSP representing executive architect. And that's how one housing after another, one IT park after another, institutional projects, they all followed. And within a span of 7 years, it was a very enriching experience, a very strenuous time, no doubt, but it was something that was most unexpected, unplanned in my life. So that's how, from running my own work practice, I went back to work for this firm. And subsequent to that, I was invited by Studio Lotus to become their design principal and help them set up their large greenfield wing. And that was another kind of very unique experience, wherein a firm which is very celebrated, which looks at design from depth, and I had this good fortune to work with some most amazing people. And within a span of 3 years, we did only 4 odd projects of very diverse nature. And today, many of those, 2 of those projects have gone ahead to win international awards. One of them is a platinum rated industrial building. And that experience brought a very new dimension to my professional life. Yet, at the end of 2017, I had this inner feeling that there's something more waiting for me. And that was a leap of faith. That was when my journey took a new turn. Because you care for your well-being. And well-being has been addressed by so many people, and that's the need of the hour. Here, this book is looking at well-being from an unprecedented standpoint, that of space design, that of relating the well-being to where we stay, how we stay, what we breathe in, what we surround ourselves with, the manner in which we connect with our spaces, and that's something anybody and everybody is doing. So in that sense, this book is not only for architects or people from the realm of space design. Of course, they would find it offering some very useful, unprecedented and curious tips. But this book is as relevant for a homemaker. This book is as relevant for a developer. This book is even as relevant for a gym owner, because all of them would find that how they can do something about their indoor air, how they can do something about the quality of the spaces of, let's say, a resort they are making, which can, just by orienting their furniture, the design in certain way that the guests get a much better sleep during their stay. This is as useful for doctors who are making new hospitals, because there are studies which show that when you there are certain wards which perform much better, where the patients recover much earlier and relapse rate is much lower than other wards. This book gives pointers to people from all realms of life, that in whatever field they are in, there is some dimension beyond the known which can enhance their well-being. And the moot idea is to make this book a vehicle to create curiosity in you towards those realms which are not commonly known, towards those sciences or those aspects of our universe, of our life, which are little known, which are researched, but those researched are not very well widely known. And this book tries to put those together, all those aspects together in a systematic manner. You are absolutely right. This is old wine in new bottle. At the same time, the difference is the person who is drinking it. And Vedic Vastu, which is as old as about 3 to 5,000 BC, the moot question that comes to my mind is how much of it is relevant and in what way in present days. See, try to see it look like this. Vastu was made in times where we did not have electricity. Vastu was made in times where our toilets used to be outside our house. Vastu was made in times where people were very different than you and I. And that is the reason why my curiosity to go deeper into this project made me ask the same question to many people, many of my teachers, that why and how can we apply those norms in today's world. And that was the start of my own journey to understand that how do really buildings speak to us? Do they really impact us, or all this is something that we just respect those books, we are following them? And that was why for a good 15 years after I became Vastu Visharad, I never practiced it myself. And just about 3 or 4 years ago, when I took turn in my own life to go dive deeper into this realm and to figure out that yes, if I really want to do something about what I know, that's the field of architecture, and bring it as a layer of design which can facilitate health, happiness and harmony, and that was what I really wanted to do. That is what made sense to me at that point of time. I knew that I had to go and find answers to those aspects of Vastu which you have asked. I have a very different definition of research. I'll start with that. It's a little different, but you'll understand it better. Today, research is understood as dissecting an aspect, going to the smallest component and trying to understand its nature. Whereas my own experience, both you can say gained out of intellectual sources as well as spiritual aspects, it pointed to some other direction. It pointed to the fact that every component gets influenced by the context. That means our reality is influenced by multitude of impacts that we come across. Any kind of truth in itself, in its dissected form, seems to be incomplete till we do not see that how it relates, how it is impacted by its context, its surrounding. The diversity that you find in this book perhaps is coming out of that mindset, that when we talk of well-being, when we talk of architecture, when we talk of other sciences, we have created silos. We have subjects and people specialize in those subjects and they do not know anything about other subjects. But the fact is, universe doesn't seem to function like that. Everything seems to be impacting the behavior pattern, the performance, the qualitative aspects of every other thing. So from that perspective, when, like I said, I started looking into Vastu, at the same time, my interest took me to study something called as building biology, which is the contemporary science of understanding that how our spaces, our architecture, our buildings impact us. And during that research, I came across many other realms which have to do with well-being, as well as those are the realms that we are using in our space design. You call it light, you call it water, we call it geopathic stresses, and so on and so forth, numerous of them. And that really astonished me, that when all these aspects are really impacting me, so in piecemeal, I know Vastu. In piecemeal, I know building biology in its aspect. In piecemeal, I may even know water. In piecemeal, I may even know how geopathic stresses impact us. But somewhere, I am the same person. And can there be a framework wherein all these things can be addressed? I cannot claim in totality, but to maximum extent together. And can we have these coming together as a coherent system of design? And that's how you see such a diversity in all these aspects. Somewhere in 80s or 90s, after a good gap of few hundred years, perhaps after not only colonial impacts, but way back when invaders burned Nalanda, it is said that thousands, not hundred, thousands of ancient texts on Vastu were lost. And what we have right now is just a handful. Now, from what I can gather and what other Vastuvids, very well-read Vastuvids gather, is that there are many aspects to this science which we are missing. We feel we cannot find all the answers, and perhaps that's where those are the texts which we are missing right now. Those are the answers that we are missing right now. At the same time, like you rightly said, a lot of time has elapsed. A lot of understanding has evolved. Science has grown by leaps and bounds. And that makes it all the more relevant that a search to fill in those gaps, a search to dive deeper with our current understanding of science, we approach these texts, whether it's Vastu, Ayurveda, Yoga Shastra, you name it, and look at them from the prism of present day science. Because if seen like that, they start to have a whole new meaning. And perhaps that's the responsibility of our generation, that if we lost something in history, perhaps our efforts can bridge that gap and we can revive ultimately all these sciences, Yoga Shastra, Ayurveda, Vastu, Sangeet, Jyotish. These were meant for well-being of society in some manner. First and foremost, I myself am a student of physics. I've loved physics. So I understand that was an investigation, not an experiment. I know very well that for an experiment, we need to be much more immaculate, systematic, and those were the conditions that I could not produce under the given circumstances. Yet I would say that not only that, but many other investigations that I have done, they were done with an intent of self-study, to understand that yes, there is something, some fact, some direction, some truth. I need to check it for myself. And that is how all these investigations were done. They were a step in a direction. Now, as far as publishing them in a peer review having them peer reviewed and publishing them in a journal is concerned, definitely all that should be done. That's how any kind of research becomes more robust. Perhaps I'll do that also. One thing that one needs to understand is that what are the methods, what are the tools by which we are measuring? And this is where there's a big dichotomy that comes in. There is something called as the established science. Those are the tools which can measure electricity, which can measure humidity, temperature. They are well established tools. However, when we are going into sciences which are talking about subtle energies, biofields, impacts of geopathic stresses on human beings, this is a relatively nascent science. It was just in 80s that Western world coined a word called biofield to describe what we all know as aura. Then subsequently tools were developed, and many of those tools are not recognized by contemporary science at all. And these tools are based on the science of radiesthesia. And simply put, human being and is perhaps the most sensitive antenna of subtle energies. And the response of any kind of subtle energies on human biofield is reflected through the muscular tension, and these devices use those kind of movements to track. So naturally there is a subjectivity to it. At the same time, when we go into to know about the tools and methods which are available in contemporary science, we also understand that they also have their threshold and limits and accuracy and inaccuracy levels. The question here is not to go deeper into which tool is right or wrong. Question is that if you have to study any realm, if you have to dive deep into any realm, you need to measure it. So one of the reasons perhaps one would wait to go dive deeper is into making these peer reviewed is to first establish a common baseline with peer reviewers, that are we on the same page with respect to the methods, the tools, the criteria on which this experiment is being done. And I felt those are the gaps that need to be filled in before we can do what you are suggesting us to do, having it peer reviewed and having it published. But definitely that's a step in the right direction. First and foremost, I am one of the fans of Mr. Corbusier myself. So there is no nothing like questioning the competency in the work. The point here is, a question came to my mind because I have stayed in Chandigarh, and once I was invited there as a mentor for master's program, and while going to the college, it just occurred to me that the entire grid of Chandigarh, is it cardinal? Because I remembered that from understanding of Vastu precepts, one of the major Vastu precept, whether it's based on climatology or whether it's based on geomagnetic lines, it proposes that the buildings should be in cardinal direction. Of course, there are the rules that define it further, how and where of it. And lo behold, when I checked that out, I saw that while there was a mention of Mr. Corbusier being influenced perhaps or sympathetic towards science of Vastu while designing, I've read it somewhere. I'm myself not sure of it, but there was a mention that how in the head zone there were institution of knowledge, how in zones in relation to Vastu Purush Mandal, the city's layout has been designed. And I found that the city's grid is at 45 degrees to the cardinal. And that suddenly made me wonder on to that whether at all this main precept, main directive of Vastu was not being met. Was it really a fact that his thought process was including Vastu precepts in the first place, or perhaps there were other criteria? And that is how I think, without any kind of criticism to this, it's more of a questioning that if at all he was influenced by Vastu, then how come this basic precept was not followed? As far as the study of ancient cities is concerned, this particular incident got me traveling down that road. And I started figuring out the orientation of all the ancient cities. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, you have ancient Beijing, you have Roman towns, you have temple towns of South India, and many more across the globe through the ages. And what I found, and that's something that I've just given a handful of examples from Google Earth images, that they are oriented along the cardinal direction. It was some of the cities, some of the Roman encampments that subsequent became cities perhaps, which I did come across, which were not purely cardinal. And even all these ancient cities, with respect to today's north, they are at an angle. But it's understandable because over centuries and millennia, the magnetic north also shifts. We are aware of that. But what interested me more was that if there was some kind of consciousness, and which was not only governed by Vastu precepts, but there must be some kind of consciousness that all ancient cities were respecting the cardinal directions. And that's where this whole idea of trying to go deeper into it, whether be from precepts of geomagnetism or even from the precept of climatology, we all are aware that it helps to orient our buildings cardinally, so that our exposure to the angular suns, early morning sun which penetrates deeper, or especially in India or northern India especially, the winter west summer sun especially, it's difficult to control. So we all know these norms, that it helps. Yet you come across city plannings, especially I think I can point it out to when concepts, new city planning concepts like garden cities, which are concentric, were founded. And then we have all the city planning which has happened in past 50 years in urban and suburban India, and not only in India or across the world, which is everywhere, which has no regard per se to cardinal directions. One just wants to question that aspect, that are we aware of the fact that geomagnetism has an impact on human well-being, and if that, which is not something that is being spoken for the first time. There are peer-reviewed research papers which I referenced in my book also, which clearly show that the alignment to the geomagnetic field is something which is inherent to living beings, and we have evolved, our systems, biological systems have evolved to this magnetism, and therefore a certain kind of orientation, especially sleep directions, have an impact on the way, on the quality of our sleep. Now come to think of it, if we have a city planning which is not cardinal, naturally the road network would also not be cardinal. All the plots which are made on it would also not be cardinal. And then on such plots, when you make a house, it would be very difficult to orient the house in a cardinal direction. In such a house, if you were to place furniture, it would be very difficult to place it in a manner that you can orient yourself, at least at night time, in a suitable cardinal direction. So that is how this linkage of a well-being of a human being, especially for the sleep direction, gets eventually related to the city layout. And this is something that I've pointed out in my book also. And the point is here that there are many pointers, there are many sciences which are saying that well-being is connected to a direction in certain way. It's time that we can explore it deeper. As I told you earlier, the attempt was to come up with a framework which can tie up these various branches in a systematic manner. And I'll be honest in saying that these 9 precepts just evolved spontaneously. There was no concrete effort when I started writing this book. In fact, 9 precepts had not really evolved when I started writing this book. The idea was to write on architecture for well-being. The framework is divided into, you can imagine it as 9 buckets, and each bucket has various realms to it. To start with, first 5 precepts, they deal with the 5 basic elements. So telluric fields, it pertains to the earth element, and all the aspects, whether it's geomagnetism, whether it's grounding, whether it's sleep direction, all these aspects, or geopathic stresses even, all these aspects are handled within this precept of telluric fields. Then we have something called as indoor climate. Indoor climate is to do with the air element. Subsequently, we have something called as vitalized water. So as the name suggests, it is about water element. Then we have luminosity. It's about the light. Light represents the fire element. And we have field free space, the space element itself. All these buckets talk about the nature of these elements from contemporary standpoint. Subsequently, there is another 6th element, which is a precept which talks about materials and surfaces. This is a very interesting and important aspect, especially for architects, and it evolves from the study of building biology, because all the architecture is made out of some material and some surface, and they have a direct impact on the manner, the quality of our indoor spaces, and consequently our well-being is impacted. So that aspect is covered within this precept. These are 6 precepts, and I can say that these are the 6 precepts which can be called to be measurable by contemporary science. They are tools by which we can measure most of the aspects in these precepts. However, the next 3 of them, which is shape science, Ayadi Vastu, and Ubuntu, those are the precepts which I cannot prove to you. But there is established science. There are people across the globe who have been working on it. There are texts written on them. All these aspects impact us. There's sufficient empirical proof that yes, they impact the well-being. Yet contemporary science is studying it further, deeper, to understand the why and wherefores of how they are working. And perhaps someday they'll come out with instrumentation that can prove it with much more solid evidence. However, that's the basic nature of these 9 precepts. And the idea is that these precepts come as a layer of design. Just like when we design architecture, we bring in a layer of sustainability. And that's how a building becomes a green building or a sustainable building. In the similar way, even if we bring 1, 2, 3, 4, how so many ever precepts into our design of architectural spaces, it will augment, it will enhance the design from well-being standpoint. So these are not rules per se. These are dimensions which can be brought into architectural design. And interestingly, these are not only for architects to integrate into design. If you go through this book, you will find that there are many aspects of lifestyle that a user who are already staying or working in a space, the manner in which they can modulate their spaces, tweak their lifestyles to get the best out of that space, that has also been included as a part of this book. The real challenge was that one realizes that well-being, the way it is understood, is not only physical or biological. There is something called as energetic aspect to it. And that's precisely what I've tried to express by bringing various concepts right in the beginning, in the section 1. And they are there to bring into the consciousness of the reader, or basically align together, that there be a manner beyond the established norms of well-being, which are, physical, biological well-being, and how can we look at the subtle aspects, whether we call it vibration, we call it frequency, we call it energy. So the first few chapters are dedicated to understanding and aligning those aspects, because the idea was that you cannot talk about an experience in the language that has been established already. It's very difficult, and that's why I had to, perhaps not by choice, but I had to take this approach of bringing what people are familiar with and putting those things together to align to a subject which is very difficult otherwise to explain. Perhaps that's best I can explain of how the first section tries to bring alignment into the mere definition of well-being. I hope that can help. I read it and find it. The idea is that so first and foremost, there is nothing new under the sun. Let's be honest about it. You are a researcher, I am a researcher, we all are searchers. So what are we searching? We are searching something that we already know. The question is not finding something new. Question is, to my understanding, finding a new standpoint of reviewing the same thing, finding new perspectives, and finally finding new applications. And that's precisely what my endeavor has been. So I will tell you, there is nothing new under the sun. You are absolutely right. But once you read the book, you would see perhaps that the perspective of the same subject, the manner in which its application to current times, to our lifestyle, to architecture design, that perhaps is the only newness one can expect from this. So I hope that with that you would find sufficient incentive to be excited about finding something new in this. If this book can create curiosity in you towards the realm of subtle energies, perhaps that would be the success of this book.